In contrast to the insider whistleblowers that we all know of, Dan Ellsberg and Snowden, they knew what they were presenting to the public. They had collected it purposefully. These people had no idea whether they would find a single file of any relevance. For all they knew, they might have, in the dark, when they picked everything out, they may have had mostly useless personnel pieces of paper, personnel files. But within an hour, as they gathered and started to go through what was in those suitcases, they found one file that made them realize that what they had done had not been in vain. And this file actually became emblematic of the burglary. It was a file in which agents were urged to enhance paranoia and make people think there's an FBI agent behind every mailbox. And even they were quite struck by that, as I was when I received that in the first set of files that I got from them at the Washington Post. 10 days after the burglary, they had completed sorting the files, dividing them into sets, and then sent them out in sequential sets over a period of 2 months. And these files were the first glimpse that the American public and Congress had of FBI files, even people in the Department of Justice, which is where the FBI is. And in the first set, in addition to that one, excuse me, in addition to the enhance the paranoia documents, were the files that describe the activity of the FBI. Informers working on campuses included people, switchboard operators who had been hired, mail carriers, and mid-level college administrators. Every black student on the campus of Swarthmore College was being watched and had an FBI file, purely by reason of being black. That was one of the distinctions, one of the things I learned from the files that I thought was interesting. There was a somewhat different standard for a white person being targeted by Hoover's FBI versus a black person being targeted by Hoover's FBI. For a white person to be targeted, you at least had to show some sign through what you read, who you associated with, letters you may have written to the editor, in the mildest form, I might add. You at least had to show some sign of being subversive within his very broad range of what subversive meant. You did have to be revolutionary. You simply might have raised questions in a letter to the editor. But you did something as a white person that attracted their attention. For a black person, it was simply enough to be black. For Hoover, to be black was to be dangerous and to be considered subversive automatically. And one of the things that showed this so clearly, I think it was in the very first set of files that I received, was the files that revealed the blanket surveillance in the black community. It was really spelled out quite clearly that a black person might come under surveillance at any place a person might normally be expected to go, the corner store, the classrooms in high school or college, churches, libraries, bars, restaurants, just anywhere. And then there were prescriptions for the people who should be hired to be informers in black communities. And students, any student who was going to go to college, any black student who was going to go to college, that person was considered a prize so that that person could then become an informer on other black students. One thing that illustrates how invasive this was is that at that time, throughout the 60s, early 70s, every FBI agent was required to have at least one informer who reported to him on a regular basis about the activities of black people. We're not saying revolutionary black people, we're just saying black people. And in DC, every FBI agent was required to have at least 6 informers who reported to him regularly on the activities of Black people. One of the things that was revealed in the media files that the public didn't know about was the existence of a security index. It had started many years before, and this was an index kept by the FBI, and it was continually expanding. And it was an index of the people that the FBI would detain without habeas corpus in the case of a national emergency. He had been told by one Attorney General, Francis Biddle, that this was unconstitutional and to get rid of it. And he said he would, but he didn't, and he simply renamed it. And Biddle also didn't do any continuing oversight and had no idea that his order had not been followed. But the worst was yet to come. There was a file in the media files that had, that was a routing slip, just a routing slip, and it had, in big letters at the top, the label COINTELPRO. And I reported on the file that it was attached to, but it didn't use the term COINTELPRO because it didn't seem to, I certainly didn't know what the connection was, that this file that I wrote about went into a large category of things called COINTELPRO. And the article that I wrote did have an impact because the FBI was watching to see if that file would be written about because they knew the COINTELPRO routing slip was attached to it. And if that came out in public, they then knew that for the first time, the term COINTELPRO was outside the Bureau. And what that caused to happen when they realized it was outside the Bureau was at first Hoover wrote to the people in charge of the offices around the country and said, just increase secrecy on these operations, but keep them up. In fact, make them even more intense. And then 2 weeks later, officials said, yeah, this is too dangerous. And they said, let's get rid of the name, not the program, but let's get rid of the name. And then each one will be approved separately from now on. So along came Carl Stern, a little more than a year after the media burglary. And Carl was a reporter covering legal affairs for NBC television at the time. And Carl, in the Senate Judiciary Committee one day, on someone's desk, saw that cover routing slip and thought, that's a strange term. I wonder what that is. And because Carl did that, the next building block in the ultimate discoveries that were made during the Church Committee took place. He took that media file and he wrote a letter to the acting Attorney General at the time, excuse me, and he asked for the founding documents that would explain what COINTELPRO was. And the Kleindienst, the acting Attorney General at the time, said that it would endanger national security to release this information and turned him down. And that's what also had been said when we wrote the media stories a year earlier. But Carl kept persevering, asking the FBI and the Justice Department. Finally, he sued. And in the end of 1973, a judge ordered that those founding papers be turned over to Carl. And at this point, public interest and Congress interest ratcheted up considerably. At the time the media files came out, there was, for the first time, a demand for an investigation of the FBI, a demand in Congress and a demand from the leading editorial pages in the country. It didn't go anywhere, but it started a movement that continued. And then with the exposure of the COINTELPRO documents, interest increased considerably. And the COINTELPRO operations turned out to be the meanest and most vicious of the Hoover operations. The actions that people had no idea were being done by the FBI. And one that probably all of you have heard about at some time was the effort by Hoover to get Martin Luther King to commit suicide. And that was probably the worst of his actions against King. But in fact, there were many, and they took place over the entire time that King was a public activist. There were other actions that resulted in death. For instance, in Chicago in 1969, Fred Hampton, the leader in the Black Panthers in Chicago, president of the Black Panthers at that time, was killed. What had happened there was that an FBI informer in Chicago became part of the Chicago Panthers and do a diagram of the apartment where Fred Hampton lived, including a drawing of what he labeled Fred's bed. And a short time after that, he submitted it to the Chicago police, and the Chicago police hired a shooter who went in and shot and killed Fred Hampton while he slept one night. And a short time after that, the FBI informer was given a reward and a thank you letter for having caused that murder.